My name.
Name and address.
My name is Achilles Panizza, Achilles M Panizza, to make it more recognizing who I am. And I live here in Dixon, California since 1918. And we moved from Napa. My dad come up here and found the place, and then we moved here in 1918. He was a dairyman back in Europe, in Italy. When he went back to visit his parents in 1922, those animals that he had left there as a boy were still existing. So we decided that was the breed he wanted to follow. And so the family took that into consideration. And the first brown Swiss that we bought came from San Rafael. The owner was a fellow by the name of, I can't think of his name right now, but he had a beautiful herd of brown Swiss. And the first time I seen him, I fell in love with him. Those big eyes and big ears and smiling faces. So then we bought a bull and two heifers. His name was Pedrotti, Jim Pedrotti. He was one of the bankers at San Rafael. And so we fell in love with him. We came home, talked about it, went back with an actual touring car, took the seats out, and that's how we hauled the animals home. And time went on, and they grew up. The first offspring was a bull. The second heifer had a bull, so we had two bulls instead of heifers. But as time went on, the heifers had their calves, they were females, and from two head to three head, two heifers and a bull. At the end, when we sold out in '73, we had 90 head of registered brown Swiss cows. Excuse me.
Where did your grandparents and great-grandparents come from?
I think I'd be safe now. The grandparents, Pa's folks, Ma's folks. Pa's folks was from Italy. Liena was a city. That's the northern part of Italy. Mom's folks came from Switzerland, Lugano. And Mom's family had, I believe, there were 9 children. But some went from Switzerland to South America. Mom remained in California here, and she had 4 children, myself and 3 sisters.
What were their occupations?
Well, now their occupations back there, the holdings weren't very large, but they did have sort of a farm type. They had these cows, and incidentally, the cows back there lived in the basement, and the people lived in the upstairs. But it didn't have to go far to get their milk.
Do you know how, when they did travel to the States, how they got here? Did they come by boat? And how did they get to the West? Do you know what their route was?
Well, they did come by boat. Both Pa and Ma both came on boats. And I think Mom said it took about 31 days. Then she settled in Napa where Pa had settled. And then they met one another there through relatives of theirs. And then they were married and raised their family.
When we first came in, you were showing us some beautiful photographs on the wall. This is a general question about that. Were there people in your family who kept diaries or photo albums, journals of their experiences in their lives, or did they keep an album with photographs?
Well, they talk about these things, you know, when we met, and we knew this through them. But they weren't, I don't think they even had a camera then. So from a photo standpoint, or a diary, I think that was all in their memory, in their head.
Did they tell you quite a few stories about their lives? Was that
Oh yes, they did. And they were very religious. Now, one thing that Mom always used to say, and I thought it, but I guess it's a belief, when they weren't feeling well, they depended on a cup of coffee. And then a lot of them used to pray, you know. And there was, Mom used to say about going to a certain stone in the mountains to ask God to help them.
Was that in these mountains here or mountains in Italy?
Back in Europe.
Uh-huh. Was there anything like that here where she would turn to any kind of thing in nature that gave her some relief or some hope?
I remember Mom always had to have her coffee. You know, that was number one medicine. Mm-hmm. And Pop, well, then they'd make the wine, but they didn't use that. They used that with their meals. And at least 2 meals a day, they always had the wine, but never for breakfast. They used that. Now, Mom, like I say, she used to believe in Alka-Seltzer when Alka-Seltzer first came out. And that was number one medicine, whether it was a toenail that hurt, a headache, or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. This may have to do with coffee and so on, but I'm wondering if you have any really early memories, childhood memories of Dixon, or even if it's just kind of memories of smells and sounds of your home growing up here. Maybe the smell of coffee in the morning, or the sounds of farms, the cows, or the color of the sky. Do you have any memories like that, or more concrete memories of what was happening in town or in your home?
Well, that's sort of a long, debatable or discussing situation. I remember the first trip I took up here, and we left at 4 o'clock in the morning. My Uncle Emil was the teamster, I guess. We left at 4 o'clock with a load of, movable merchandise. And on the way up, I remember that was quite different than what our setup was at Napa. We had probably one apple tree or something like that. But on the way up, it must have been in the summer, because I remember we'd stop. We prepared ourselves and took some bread and cheese in case we got hungry. But on the way up, I remember stopping. The figs were ripe, so we ate bread and figs. Then we go a little farther, and then there was the grapevine, so we had grapes to eat. But I remember stopping that night. It was 9 o'clock. We left at 4. That night, we got here at Dixon at 4 o'clock. And I was a tired little kid.
Do you have a guess on maybe how old you were at that time?
I was born in 1910, so I was probably 8 years old.
And was that road pretty bumpy, or was it a pretty smooth
there were no roads. We almost had to make our roads, It was all dirt roads, and with 4 horses. You didn't run. You might run a little while, but then, you'd have to slow down.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds as if most of your memories were having your own food, or not having food at, let's say, a store or an inn or something like that. So there wasn't much of that along the road.
No, that was very limited. It was far and few between. Because I remember the first place we went through was when we left the ranch there at Napa, was probably Fairfield. And we went through Vacaville, and then there was no industry to speak of. There were a lot of ranches, small ranches, and that was it.
Let me see. Do you remember what families were here during your youth here? Did you have buddies who you played with, or?
The first family that I met when we moved here was the family, the Yole family. And then they had relatives that come later, but Pat Ford was one. Jack Fox, and then he married Emma Yole, so that tied in that family. And Lena, she was a Yole, and she became a school teacher. People names like the Sisson family were neighbors, and can't think of very many of them. But see, there were a lot of places, generally 40 acres. 40 acres then was a big, big farm.
Did the families visit each other regularly for?
Well, yes, and they used to help one another
Uh-huh.
with the crops. You know, if you had hay to do, we'd help the O's, and then they'd respond and help us. And Dodini's another family, and we used to all work together. Very friendly, everybody was.
So the occasions for visiting often had to do with tasks that had to be done and people helping each other
But
out?
then again, when you had your holidays come in, then we'd have gatherings of different families, you know, the neighbors, close neighbors, and invite them in. And I can remember, Mom used to like to sing, and she'd entertain us singing one thing and another.
Was there a great deal of preparation that went on for those gatherings? Was there a lot of cooking and
Well,
hustle and
yes,
bustle around the
yes,
house?
they did. Mom was always, and even Pa. I remember Pa'd always bake up a big tripe of soup Christmas Eve, and then the chestnuts, the dried chestnuts, that was a treat to us because we had the cream, and then you had chestnuts and cream. And the polenta, if you know what that is.
One of my favorite things in the world. It's like a polenta. And you mentioned your mom singing. Did you have any musical instruments in the house?
I can remember the first phonograph that we bought, and it come time to milk. The dealer from, the agent from San Francisco came in about milking time, and we wanted a phonograph, and I still have it. Just a little box, you know, and the cost of that was $75. I remember that. We played it and played it and played it. And there was one favorite record there that was my choice, Silver Threads Amongst the Gold.
And did your mom have a favorite? Do you remember?
Well, she used to practically like all music because they didn't have anything, you know, to depend on.
Let's see. Do you remember much about early Dixon schools?
Yes,
You had
I
told
do.
me a little bit about being in school.
I got pictures right here that I can show you a picture. I'm not in it because I was too young, but Marianne Catherine was in it. That was the Soscall School there at Napa. And we were about 6 miles, and we got there with a horse and buggy. And the horse was blind in both eyes. So you had a reiner, you know, with the lines.
And how was school for you? Was it?
Me, well, the first few days I wanted to run away.
Were there a lot of kids in the class, or was it pretty small?
I think there were about a dozen, including my 2 sisters. There they are, and the teacher's name was Miss Ferrell. And when we left down there, it's about a dozen.
You could take a photo of it
Yes.
too. Do you remember having that picture taken? Was it a kind of an
Well,
event?
like I say, I was too young to be at school,
Right.
but I can point out my 2 sisters in here. Yeah. And I got to know all these fellows here. I was a little knot when I went. I guess this is the youngest one here. And I was one of the youngest, Mary and Catherine. That's Mary right there, and that's Catherine. And that one, Miss Ferrell there was a teacher. And when we moved up here, she wanted to teach up here, but she never could locate us. And then she taught at, I believe, what's your school's name? Owen School for a while. And she lived to be 90 years of age when, you know, we used to correspond up until she passed away.
And you said you had your better subjects, such as you liked
Well, I used to
things.
like spelling and arithmetic, as they called it then,
Mhm.
grammar, but I could outspell just about anybody that could spell.
And did you have spelling bees here, or?
Not too much then.
Mhm. Did you go on to high school, or did anybody in your
Yes.
family keep going in terms of school?
Yes, I graduated from grammar school, the Grant School, that was a country school, in about 1925. Then I went to high school for 4 years, graduated there in 29, and the class was only about 30 students then. And then I went to Heald's Business College and took what would you call it, commercial course. And in that commercial course, where we had, most of it was bookkeeping, and then we had English, spelling, writing, and typing. Now, I could type 30 to 60 words a minute on an old Underwood typewriter, which was, then when I went to high school, I took shorthand, but about the 7th month, I broke the time cranking the car, so I had to write left-handed, and then that spoiled my shorthand.
When you went to grammar school, how did you get there? Did you go by bus, by
Well,
car, or did you walk?
When we were living in Napa, we went, like I said, with the horse and buggy. And then when we moved here at Dixon, we were miles from the school, so we walked. When the rain came, then they'd take us, on common days, we walked to school and walked home.
So how long do you think a typical a day going to school and coming back, how long would that be?
Time-wise?
Yeah.
Oh, it wouldn't take us long, because on windy days, we'd do like the birds would follow one another, they had the leader and the caboosement at the end.
Mhm.
And we could walk that in about a half hour.
Just a little bit, we kind of touched on this earlier, but how far away from town were you, town proper? And when you traveled to town or visited bigger cities such as Sacramento or San Francisco, how did you get there in your youth? Let's say, I don't know, in your adolescence, when you were a teenager or when you were a little younger.
Well, I remember before we had any automobiles, we depended on horsepower, the horses. And generally you'd have generally one horse on a small buggy. And, I guess a horse goes about 5 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour, it's a little faster than walking, and they're running. And it'd probably take us half hour, 3/4 an hour to go to town. That was 6 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we would go to Sacramento, we used to depend to get on the Southern Pacific passenger train that used to stop right at Dixon, get on it, and then in Sacramento, you'd probably take I don't know whether they had taxis or not then, but somebody with a horse would take you there.
Mm-hmm. Why, when you did go to Sacramento, why did you usually go?
Either we'd go to Sacramento at times to buy parts for equipment, say your mowing machines or hay equipment, and then just about every September we'd go to the Sacramento State Fair.
Mm-hmm.
That would make a day of it, leave in the morning and then get back at night.
Very nice. This leads me to the next question. My question is, what did you do for pleasure? Did you go to dances? Did you go to the Dixon? Did you participate in the Dixon May Fair? So were fairs very important in terms of your pleasure trips and activities?
When we first moved here, they had what they call the May Pole Fair. That was the first part of it. They generally go through, I don't know what you call it, but you had like a merry-go-round and banners on it, And then they'd have the racetracks there. We used to have the sulky races. Even local people participate in that. We knew them, so we'd make it a point. But we had to be careful when we were growing up that there was no punishment in the past or they'd forbid us to go to the fair. So we were real careful kids and behaved ourselves. I enjoyed the fair. And then as years went on, I participated in getting the cattle class in the fair because they had no cattle there. And I can show you pictures here of some of that.
Did you usually exhibit something, you and your family?
Well, yes, because I've got a picture here where I had a bull that was hard to handle. So I said, well, I'm going to be a little stubborn with you. So I taught that bull to bow and kneel down. And I had to show that as an exhibit at the fair.
Also, you had mentioned your mother's kind of beliefs and so on. Did you go to church when you were here, or did your family go to church, and were there church events? Were there social events as well, and was that kind of a part of your life too?
We were all, we took Holy Communion, being Catholics, Holy Communion, we were confirmed, and we were baptized in church, all of us. And then catechism, we'd go to church every Sunday. And we were confirmed, so we went to church for that. And when I married, we married at Carson City, but then again, we were married in our local church here.
What was the name of that church?
Church St. Peter's, here in Dixon. And that was built, I think, in 1914, so it's an old church, but a beautiful church.
And were the services well attended? There were quite a few members?
Oh, yes, yes. And they did have their socials, but being in the dairy business, we couldn't participate in all of this. Then when I went to school, I used to like to play football. I was into football, but we had to get home and do our footballing with the cows. So consequently, I didn't participate in sports, and then I got hooked in the school play. I had the leading part, and that was the name. I was the arrival Kitty, and I was Uncle Winkler. They put chalk in my hair and never could get it out, and it's still white.
I see. And did you or Uncle Winkler ever participate in the politics of Dixon in any way, shape, or form?
Well, the actor was, yes, because I belong to different organizations, the California and the National Brownsville Cattle. That's got to do with the cattle. And we got the classes at the Dixon Fair between myself and Mr. Rao, who was a dairyman. Excuse me. And then I belonged to the Resource Conservation District and the Dixon Game Club, different things like that.
Are there or were there any members of local government here in Dixon who left an impression on you?
That was Congressman Baldwin, I think was his name, yes. And, well, I had occasion, to approach him and express myself on some of the things.
Can you say why he left an impression? Was he
Well,
effective?
Over the period of years, we even had a Navy plane flame out and crash amongst our herd. That was back in, I think, about 1950s. And this individual got mention of this, and he really helped me because there was loss on cattle. And he really helped me in Congress to speed this thing up. Because I know of cases where the other cases that went on and on and on, but he got word of it, come out and visit with me and found out the details and took it right back. And the Navy Department responded in a hurry.
And you approached him by letter, or did you write a letter to him explaining what had happened?
Well, I met him. They had a dinner that he was running, for position. And they had a breakfast for him. I was invited, but it was too early because I was taking care of the cattle. Then he was nice enough to come out at the the site and get all the details.
In your opinion, what have been some of the most serious debates in Dixon, political debates?
At one time, there weren't very many because the community was small and we practically knew every individual that lived here. And they seemed to get along real well, but I noticed today it's terrible. The councilmen are fighting one another. The school board is, I don't know, they can't seem to cooperate and put their heads together and pull in the same direction. They're pulling apart.
You see that as a pretty new dynamic?
Very much so.
This is a little bit of a change of subject, but were there any buildings that were special to you in this area? They could be, let's say, on your farm or in town or any building whatsoever that were special to you because they were beautiful and useful? And if there are, or if there were, can you describe one of them?
Well, one that used to be the Peterson home. Peters or Peterson, mother? Peters. That was the most outstanding building that I've ever seen. It's a brick building. It's still there today. And all the new buildings, with the growth of the town, it's still outstanding. It's still there to be seen.
Do you remember when it was built?
Well, we came in 1918. That was already there.
And is it a house or?
Yes, it's a two-story house.
What kind of, I think you covered this, but mainly you talked about what kind of farming you did when you were a boy, and what I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about maybe how, if the type of farming you did changed throughout time. Has it changed? It seems that you're mostly a dairy farmer, but did that change?
Oh, yes. It changed like the growth of the town, because when we first started out with the dairy, our dairy was about 40 cows, and it was a mixed herd. Then that kept increasing as time went on. You had to increase in order to make the thing pay, volume-wise. And well, I could tell you what it was during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
It was, you could buy a dozen eggs for 15 cents, a loaf of bread for 18 cents. Milk was probably, to the consumer, I'd say about 20, 25 cents. And this thing here bothers me today. Like in our operation, we had to increase from, we were milking 90-some cows morning and night. And in order for them to pick up the milk, we had to increase to 150. We were aging, you know, and Pa says, I don't like the way this thing is moving, so he says, sell lock, stock, and barrel. So I says, I'll sell the barrel, but not the stock. So then we went on to them. And another thing I'd like to bring out is, I was vice president of the National Association. So in order to remain there, I have to keep one animal. So I kept one, and then now I've got about 10 head of Swiss again.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess those there were working, you know, we keep them in the family, and anything happens to me, well, if they want to keep them, I'd like to see them keep them.
This may have to do a little bit with what you're talking about, and maybe has a little bit change of emphasis, but I was going to ask you, in terms of the type of farming you're doing, what machines were used by the farmers that changed the way farming was done? I think that you touched upon it a little bit.
Well, then it was all horsepower. And I can remember the day that Pa and I was in the same field plowing. He was plowing with the horses, and I had the tractor, and every so many rounds I'd catch up to Pa. And so now, today, everything's mechanized and computerized, which I don't understand the principle of. I know what it is, but don't ask me how it does it function. And where we used to repair our own equipment today, if we haven't got the instruments to test and find the problem, we cannot repair it.
The machines that you did use that were important to you, who made those machines? Where did they come from? I know you had mentioned going into Sacramento. Did they come from bigger cities?
Yes.
And who usually owned those machines?
Well, the machines you'd purchase, and then if you found that it was a necessity, you'd buy it. Now, when we were used to haying, the mowing machine was very important. And following the mowing machine, you have to have the rakes. Most of the equipment was built in the Midwest, like John Deere, Alice Chalmers. They were all, I found this out when I was vice president in travel, that I seen a lot of the places that the machinery we used to use where it was manufactured.
Did you yourself share some of your equipment with other farmers, or you were pretty much self-sufficient?
We were pretty much self-sufficient because we found out when you borrowed anything, I never liked to borrow. If I was in that position, I'd always try to rent rather than borrow. Because it seemed as though whenever you borrow something always happens, and you don't want to return it in that condition, so it costs money to repair it. So if we
And as far as your remembering goes, what businesses seem to do well in Dixon? Were there any kind of important businesses?
Well, we used to have, when we moved here, there was the Tim Dairy, and that was associated with Doyle, a gentleman come in from Nevada, probably had quite a bit of spending money, and he ran the largest dairy in the world. And it was right on the we'd go by, say we went to Sacramento on the train, had a big sign on the roof of that barn, the largest dairy in the world. And that went on, and they used to process the milk and haul it to town in bottles. They'd bottle on the ranch, put it in bottles, on ice, and take it to the depot there at Dixon. And the train would stop the express and bring it to San Francisco market.
How about local shops? Are there any of the same shops in town that have been around for a while? Do you shop at the same places, or did that all change quite a bit?
Well, that has changed considerably. Now, we used to have several slaughtering houses here, which now is no more. It seems as though we went from volume and big business today, where we used to have, say, 3 slaughterhouses here locally or sales yard. There are no more. And we lost now we used to have a Southern Pacific Depot here, which we haven't today, but now they're working on it again, but politically it's hard to get. And then the highways were simple, 2 lanes, and now we have 4-lane highways. And the big problem today is the underpass, because we have, getting in the city, you got north underpass and east and west, and they're trying to get one, because with these underpasses, the highway coming in and more traffic, they bypass the town now, but at that time, there was a time that I seen a car on a foggy day where they had these stations, with the shafts and people up here in the tower. And I remember that was one episode when I went to high school. That Greyhound bus got hit by a Southern Pacific train and killed 17 or 18 people. So those things are all in the state of changing now.
Have there been many accidents kids getting hit by trains and things like
Yes,
that?
there's been
So-
generally at the depot, well, the trains used to come through there with the flyers that didn't stop. And they were traveling, a lot of older people got hit by them and killed.
Were there any natural catastrophes that occurred in your lifetime, such as fire or flood? And if they did occur, did they affect you much? Were there any big fires in town or floods?
I remember when I went to high school, we used to have a Chinese rooming house on the way into school. One north windy day, something happened and that burnt. Now, we used to have a bakery in 1917 when Paul come up to buy the ranch. He was in town and they had a bakery fire, and one of the firemen that we knew, the Evans son, he was killed. He fell off the roof and he got killed. And the windstorms and things like that. And affecting us, yes, we've had some years we have 30 inches of rain, and we have crop damage because of high water.
Do you have memories of the wars?
Well, I remember wearing the, what did we have to do? Well, we'd participate. We'd sell magazine. They'd come out magazine, you know, and it was all for the importance of the helping the war people. 1918, I remember that one. I was just a boy, but then, you know, they used to talk about it and knew a lot of the friends and neighbors and so forth that had to participate. I always got deferment because I was in agriculture, but I felt sometimes, gee, I've got my friends over there, you know, and I'd say, well, I should be there with them, but I was producing food, so I got exempted.
Was there any particular pressures that you had in terms of what you needed to produce for the war?
Well, everything was rationed, and I remember one time, because we didn't buy tires because of the fun of it, you know, but the equipment was on rubber, and sometimes we needed a tire, and you had to wait, say that you blew out a tire in the field, you had to have a tire now, and you'd probably wait 3 or 4 days, you know, before you could even get a tire.
And had all your family come over by the time there was the Second World War? Or was anybody there affected by World War II, or were any of your members of your family?
Not members of the family, but relatives.
And did you hear about that through letters and so on?
Oh, yes.
What kind of
That was
things did they
sad.
say? What did they say usually, or do you remember what they said? Or?
Well, I remember one time, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it happened. I had a very close friend. They called, or, you know, both of us were called. Then I got an agricultural deferment, but he had to go on. And he didn't want to advance. He wanted to be a private first class, and that was it. And he sent me a picture of where, you know, when we had this Japanese disturbance, he sent me a picture, you know, they beheaded this Japanese individual, and I remember the head was laying over here and the body over here. So, but he was a character, because when we used to hunt together, he'd shoot a fox or something like that and cut his ears off, and then he'd say, "Look what I did." So I felt sorry, because and one of the boys that went developed a fever. He never come back. He died in action.
Let's see. Did the Depression change your day-to-day life much? How did it?
It sure did. When you learn to work for 25 cents an hour and 10-hour days, that stays with you.
And where did you work?
Well, when Pa come back from Italy, he had a nephew that wanted to come out here. So then he finally, when his quota come up, he came out here. So then there was they didn't have any room for us, you know. So as I was about 14, 15, I got a job up in the orchards in winters picking fruit. And actually the first day they put me in the cutting shed cutting apricots, and it took me all afternoon to cut a box of apricots, so that didn't appeal with me. So then the next day they had needed field picking up windfall, so they got us out there. And then they started picking, I started picking, you know, we were fast going up and down the ladder in comparison to the older people, so we had a place to go all the time.
And how about members of your family or your friends during the Depression? Did it change their lives much as well in a similar way?
Well, I'd say we all suffered from it, you know, but we figured, well, the Depression hit and better days are coming, so you stayed with it and then, you know, improved or eliminated that situation. But it was hard on everybody.
I think we pretty much know the answer to this question, but I was thinking you might want to talk about it a little bit more. What work have you done throughout your life? Would you like to just talk about that some more?
Well, when I went to high school, grammar school, we were part of the operation. We had chores to do. When we went to high school, it was a similar situation, but then what we took, I took mechanics, you know, woodworking, mechanics, shop work, and forge work, which was all interesting to me. And and then when I went to college, when I graduated from the commercial school, studying bookkeeping and all that, typing. I took a course because I followed up a brush-up course in Heald's business, the machine shop, and the electrical work and things like that. So all that was useful, you know, in the operation. So if they had to put up a barn, well, I was capable of doing it. If I had to fix a house or a roof, I was capable of doing. So we kept busy. It was interesting to us.
What were some of the tasks that you had to do day to day for your farm to make things run?
Well, management would be the big factor. And then the taking care of the cattle. You milk the cattle, you fed them. You learn to do veterinarian work, you know, the health of the animals. And that was all part of the operation. Now, if you were out there running a pump and you had electrical troubles, you try to solve that, or around the milk barn, your machines. And before you depended on, unless it was major. If it was major, then, but we tried to do all those simple things that was possible.
When did your day begin and when did your day end? Was it a very long day?
It began, the first year I went to college, I come home during the summer to help. And then I went back in the winter months to finish up, and then the following spring I graduated. And, well, it's whatever come up to be done was done.
And I was going to ask you, in terms of changes in the world, what has caused the biggest change in your life? And it could be anything, something in your personal life, something in the world such as electricity or computers or cars, or it could be something that happened in your family. What has, would you say, made the biggest change in your life?
I don't know the biggest, but there were a lot of changes.
What were some of them?
I remember the first television picture I seen, the first movie that I seen, and that has all changed. Television now bothers me quite a bit because I feel some of these programs that's on there, especially for the children, I'm opposed to that. And all this, another thing, we used to be friendly and respected one another. Now we have gangism, we have drugism, we have all the isms. And I'm opposed to all of that. I say when there's a problem, there's a reason for it, and you find the reason and correct the problem. Now, another thing that I feel bad about is our judicial system. Now, everything now is computerized, and I don't know, I just can't see where that's the answer. What's going to follow our computers? And the weather, now the weather, I've kept weather logs on weather and logs on wells, and today we have different approaches on this thing. Now there's no reason why, see, I was for the Monticello Dam, but why was I for it? Because we're digging for water with wells and it was getting deeper and deeper. I'd go down 50 feet and then I'd take my neighbor's water, so he'd go 60 feet. And so then that didn't work, so then they put the Monticello Dam in. Well, the way I feel, you resolve one problem and create another. Now they're talking about this, Los Angeles wanting more water all the time, and they proposed to put a distribution system in here. Well, that's fine, but Los Angeles, we need that water here as well as Los Angeles because of the growth and one thing and another.
What problem did the Monticello Dam solve, and what problem did it create?
Well, it resolved, we had 7 years of drought and that dam almost went empty. And so then we had 3 wet years, and 3 wet years, that dam is full of water. Now that what happened there created a problem here. Either the dam created the problem or the city of Dixon holding ponds. Because that water here got shallow stratus, a stream that goes through here, and it's feeding into that stream, creating more water. Now they're trying to resolve this, but I don't know. They even called in the Corps of Engineers for an answer, but they can't find an answer to resolve this thing yet. So that's a new one that we're working on.
Does that pertain to methods of irrigation
Yes,
as well?
it does.
How does it pertain to that?
Well, what they're doing, what the cause of it that's existing, they haven't developed a drainage system. They're working on that, but that's going to be a costly one.
And finally, I remember when we first spoke on the phone and this afternoon earlier on, you said that you've always been thinking about writing a book, or your family has wanted you to write one. And I was thinking that maybe this was the beginning of this interview. Do you have any other personal memories or things that we haven't covered that you might want to talk about?
Well, I imagine if I give it a little thought, there's lots of things we could talk about.
Would there be anything you'd want to include that we haven't covered?
Can't think of anything right now. I have a lot of pictures I could show, but
Well, maybe we'll take the camera around and look at them and talk about the
yeah,
pictures.
we take some pictures or something of the antiques, some of the old equipment.
Sounds very good.
I've got pictures here of, when the cows were shipped out of California, when we were loading them up. That was kind of a hard decision to make,
Why did you have to do that?
It happened in 1973.
How did it come about?
Huh?
How did it come about to happen?
Well, it come about, first we having trouble. See, I sold Tobacco Valley Creamery for 17 years, and competition forced them to go out of business. And where I made the mistake, if I'd have sold to a major creamery then, of course, our age was against us. And we couldn't keep up what we were doing, so that was number one. Number two, then we were supplying milk and had no market to ship it, so you can't do that. So then the next choice was, well, sell out. But we did this for so long that you know it gets to be a habit. We did it, but then again, well, there's a lot of memories behind all that. They say, well, supposing you did have a market, but then it's a competitive thing today, and it's hard to put up with some of the ideas. Say, we used to have, you know, your environmental people. When we built the youngster's house down there, I wanted it next door here. And the planning commission wouldn't allow it because there was an ordinance in the county, one home per 40 acres. So we had to pick a spot down there, and then we had to sandbag that place because otherwise the water get in the house. So these problems, it's, you know, you eliminate one and build another.
Maybe we should finish for now, and then maybe look at some pictures and
Well,
look
I
at
can
your
show you
place.
some pictures now. That was a school truck to Dixon. They will walk to Dixon from Napa to Dixon, which was 40 miles by road. And who took them up here? Two cowboys, which were neighbors. They herded them up here and went right down through Fairfield, the county seat of the county, went up that street and up on this side to Highway 40. That was a 2-day task.
What else did you forget?
Because there's no trouble.
Is there anything else you're thinking?
What else
Any
was
trouble?
that?
I
You're
mean, that-
welcome.
My
Huh?
kids wrote that up in their school thing about their families, and everyone couldn't believe it, you know, because
Sure.
Highway 40 is Midway Road, you know, and that's how they got here. And he has a container of his first ice cream he ever had
Yeah.
was in a metal container.
What kept it frozen?
Well, they were used to pack them in ice. Dad and I used to go to town, and he'd always stop at the Ambrosia Creamery and get me an ice cream cone. The first one I got, I didn't know, I licked the ice cream down the cone, and I asked Pop, what do you do with this? He says, eat the rest of it.
Anything else you can think of? So we talk about?
Tell them about what Christmases were when you were growing
Oh,
up compared to our
yes.
children.
That was something. You know, the family were trying to live, raise their family. Come Christmas time, we couldn't go to the store and buy a dozen things like we do today. I remember the first pocket knife my dad gave me, and that was a Christmas present. If I didn't lose it, I still have it today. Now the girls, they used to give them these little jewelry vanity things. I still have a couple in the office there. I just take care of these things. And what we used to do, we take a shoebox, you know, and put ribbons in it, put bows on it. What did they put in the box? Well, they'd give us an orange, an apple, and some nigger toes, and an almond, some almonds, and candy. And that was it, and one present. Now the kids, our grandchildren, if you don't give them 40 presents, they're not happy.
Did you have a tree?
We'd cut one. Pa and Jenny go in the pine tree and cut the top off. He almost got electrocuted one time because he went up there with a metal pole saw, you know, and he got a shock.
Should we look around a little bit? Film a little bit around the place?
Yes,
Would that be good?
if you want to. Here, Elvira Marianne, we went to grammar school together. That's her, and I'm here, I think. And she's still living. She's over there at Santa Rosa, what do they call it? Ronnet Park. There's a old age place over there. She's over there. We correspond. I call her on the telephone every holiday and so forth. But that was the extent of the grammar school there. I'm gonna have a heck of a time putting these all back. That was the grammar school picture too.
This was your building?
That was the grand school, yes.
It's a
the
nice
school.
building.
Yes, it was a nice building. Now it's a home. They got one more.
So it still stands.
Yes, it does. They made a home of it. There's my high school pictures. I don't know what I did with them. See, the class of the high school from 20, I graduated in 29, there was 29 students, and there's about 6 of them left, and the class reunion, we used to have them up until about 3 years ago, but there's so many, just a least number, and we're all handicapped, so we don't have them anymore.
So let's show you.
Here, well, your dad came over first and worked in Napa.
Well, that's.
Then your mother came, went through Ellis Island.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah. And then she came by train across
There's
the
some
country
more
that took, I
information,
forget how long he said.
So she came by train.
Yeah,
Ah.
from New York.
From New York to
Really?
California. Yeah.
So she's there, she must be there in Ellis Island remembered. I know that they have names of people
Yeah, they came
who
through
came
Ellis
through.
Island.
you know, so.
And she never would go back to visit because she said she would never go on that boat again.
Uh-huh.
It was such
Well,
a
that
bad
was the means of
experience.
traveling then. You had no choice.
No.
Now, when Paul went back to, in 1922, he went with train from here to New York, and then he got on the boat, the White Star Lines. What was the name of that boat? Olympic or something, Olympia or something like that. Crossed the water, and they were on the water 5 or 6 days.
You went around the Horn?
Well, I don't know where he went, but I remember he sent me, they went through Salt Lake, and he sent me a little bag of salt from Salt Lake to Utah.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, as he went, he'd pick up these little souvenirs and send them back. Yeah. We'd always watch the mailman to get them.
Have you been east? Have you gone east?
The farthest east I went was New York. What was the city?
Went to Syracuse, New York.
Yeah, Syracuse. And then I wanted to get into Canada. We were about 10 miles from Canada. Canandaigua, I think, was a place that's right on the border. I never traveled. And then in my travels, like I used to, was interested, the electrical motors, the electric motors, I seen where they used to manufacture them in the east or somewhere. Most of the equipment we had come from either back there, either eastern part or Midwest or so forth. That was interesting to me. One afternoon we were going from New York to Iowa, and what was that, the Erie Canal?
Mm-hmm.
The Erie Canal, we crossed it. I couldn't believe it.
Pretty famous canal.
And then the buildings, in the geography books, they had all these pillars. Well, back there, we actually seen them. The other thing I seen was a lot of buildings, brick buildings and big buildings. And I says, how come brick is high? How come? Well, they probably 3 stories. The parents lived here, the next generation here, the next generation on the 3rd flat. And then the Indian reservations, there were a lot of them. The first trip I took, I wouldn't look out of the window on a plane. Then toward the end, I got to, realize what was going on. Then I couldn't see enough, up there traveling. I really enjoyed that.
Do you know if your mom stayed in New York after she got off of Ellis Island, or did she come west right away? Do you know?
Well, they had to go through, what did they call that, immigration station? They
Right.
had to go through all the details there,
Mm-hmm.
and then she got on the train and come west.
She came right away.
Pretty direct after
Right.
everything was clear.
Right.
Then Pa, I remember he used to study States citizen. And I remember how many hours he was going through that book studying, you know, to pass the test. He made it.
Should we go around with the camera a little bit and look at the...
Yeah, I'll show you some of the things we have around
So
here.
you'd like me to take this, make copies?
Worked for the milling, Napa Milling for years and years. I remember we'd visit down there. He had a long beard, and he was cleaning wheat, and he looked like a wheat stack with his beard, you know. He was 80-some years old, and he'd take a sack, fill it up, because he was sewing the sacks. They were cleaning, and then went in the sacks, and then he'd sew it up. And they went 5 high on the hand truck. He'd flip it over his knee and put it up there like I could handle it at my age. Just by doing, you know, it gets to be an act.
Yep.
Yes,
All
I do.
in
Yeah.
Swiss Italian.
Really?
You can't read them.
And on Pa's side, of the family, there's letters written, I don't understand this, how it went from German to Italian, because there's some letters still that we have are written in German. And then when Mom left, her sisters went to South America. There were 2 of them. Mom wasn't even born when they left. And then we used to correspond. They corresponded in Spanish.
But they've had several relatives, your mother's side over that lived in Napa. I don't know when they came. You know.
For instance,
Yeah.
who?
Well, they're all gone now.
Yeah.
Your cousin, all the Lukinis, that we used to go and visit in Oswaldo.
But
They're all gone
they're
now.
all gone.
There's no relatives.
And then on
Here,
our
right.
side, in Europe, we have a priest, a Catholic priest, that he still writes to us now. Now, he's 80-some years old.
Yeah.
So when Babe lost her husband, Babe's our younger sister, lost her husband, I was supposed to go with Babe, taking a trip to Europe. See. But then her niece and son-in-law got in the picture, so I didn't want to interfere. I felt I was interfering with them, so I didn't go. But they went to all the cathedrals and castles and everything, you know.
So when you,
Come, I remember bringing up this subject of that. We used to have meat quite frequent when we had the cattle, you know, the different, I was president, and then these others, vice president. So we'd meet lots of times. We'd meet at our home this time and the other person's home, so. And the Treats from who was my secretary, Gertrude Treat, she's still alive. She's, I think, 80, close to 90 years of age now. They used to come. And well, the family, if they came, we were eating, they were welcome to come in and eat. So this particular time, Pa had shot a bunch of blackbirds or linnets, you know, and cook them. I'll tell you, they're delicious, with a lot of gravy, you know, and polenta. Well, the Treats come in there, and they never tasted polenta before. Oh, my goodness, they praised that thing. They never ate anything so good. Now, the same way with wine, you know. Pa used to make the wine. And, well, we'd get the grapes here at one time. Well, it wouldn't keep. When spring come, that wine had turned vinegar. So you don't want too much vinegar, you want wine. So then we started buying it in Napa Valley from the Hogan brothers, and it had a lot of sugar. And then you'd add, it had too much sugar, it was too sweet. And then you'd add water to it, but then you still had a good glass of claret wine. And I remember when I went to high school, sometimes it'd get late in the year and it got cold, and that fermentation wasn't working. So then you'd cover it up, and then before I went to high school in the morning, I'd have to get up there. We made a paddle. They said never use metal with wine. So we made a paddle, and I'd have to go down and push that pumice pumice down in the liquid, see? And the mosquitoes then, it was hot under there, it was full of mosquitoes or gnats. But I put good wine. Fashioned 400 gallons. Well, 400 gallons wasn't very much.
They
Well,
always
I
have wine
remember.
on the table.
I
Yeah.
remember this prohibition thing. Pa got up one night, it was bothering him, you know, because there was an awful fine if you had. So he got up and there was barrels in the basement, 3 or 4 extras, and he rolled them up them stairs and put it over in the barn and covered it up with hay.
But you never got, nobody came by. Were you ever checked on? Did they ever?
We were the neighbors now. There was this fellow, Julius Dodini, he got to be a bootlegger, and he was selling wine. And, he got picked up. Well, in the neighborhood there, well, it could happen now if they went in our basement and says, you've got too much, well, we're gonna be imposed with a penalty. We didn't want that. And there were many barns that burnt down because these fellas, I could name, but I won't dare mention the names, but they were all neighbors. They used to have the still, you know, and take the pumice of the grapes and run it through the still and make brandy. And there's been many a barn that burned out, but these fellas, how they outsmarted these people. These dark firemen used to love to drink. We used to go out and have the firemen come out to burn thistles, and Pop would take a gallon of wine and put it under a hay shock. Well, they could almost smell that thing, and then when it was through, they'd drink it. And they said, gee, this is great, we don't get this every day, you know.
His mother was the best cook, and they used to butcher. First year we got married, I got initiated into cutting the meat off the bone and just about cut my thumb off. And then I was a tyer, I got to tie the sausage, but they made everything themselves, you know.
I used to love to tie up them sausage legs.
Dad,
It was
his dad would
fast.
fill them, and him and I would tie them. One
It was a
making the
family,
dough. Everybody did it.
everybody pitched in.
But his mother, now, there was a difference when you go to their house and when you would go to the way I was raised. Because she always had soup cooking on the stove. Always. They ate soup every day, winter, summer, spring, or fall.
Yeah.
And she cooked big meals, 3 of them a day. And because they started, well, I heard her ask you what time your day started, and when it ended, it would start like 3:30 in the morning and end about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, you know. And on holidays, I never saw so much food in my life. I mean, my mother's English. And sure, we had the turkey and the dressing and the potatoes and the gravy, you know, and this type of thing. But I mean, of course, they had raviolis. You know.
Homemade.
Always had raviolis and ham and turkey. And we just never saw so much food. So it's tradition now. We have, I don't make them, but we have raviolis every holiday. You know, my kids look forward to that because that's what Grandma did, you know. And Grandpa, I can remember when our daughter was little, and we'd sit down at the table, he'd say, give that girl some wine. So they would dilute it, you know, so she'd have a glass of wine. Then she had to have coffee in the morning. If we were over there in the morning, he'd add milk to it, you know. But whatever they did, you know, he said, let that girl have some of that, you know.
Well, then, give me the other package. I don't know. If you don't. Now, there's the cattle, some pictures of the cattle. Let's see, I think this one here pretty much covers it.
They do have beautiful faces, don't they?
Oh, when they're babies, they're just darling. Never mind, just put that away.
You go through that one, and if you have any questions, who they are, but I think they're marked
Should I
in there.
hold these?
Yeah.
So then Andrew can text.
honored him.
honored at one of the meetings.
I see, very nice. Very good.
There's pictures in there now. I built that thing there on the left-hand side. There's a hay loader.
Did you design it too, or?
Yeah, it's all built out of scrap.
Uh-huh. And it was a certain kind of,
Loose hay loader.
Uh-huh.
Pick up big shocks of hay.
so you kind of invented it?
Well,
It's burned
it's
out.
more or less,
Well-
oh, yes.
Where did you learn how to do that?
Well, started at high school in mechanics. And then every piece in there was taken off of something else and put into this thing to make it work.
And did other people who, like,
There were,
who you knew help you, or was it that
Well,
something you
yes,
kind of-
me and a fellow by the name of Guido built the whole thing. The welding and the machine work.
Are there others, or is that the only one?
Well, yeah, but none was the same. You see, what we did, I was about one of the last ones that put it together, and I come in with ideas, some of theirs and some was my own. Now, there where the mangers are, that thing there,
Mhm.
that was my idea how to close all the stanchions at one time. And it started out with a piece of baling wire, and then it ended up made out of metal. So you could release one cow or release them all. And generally, when you have a cow, you know, that's probably sick and you want to milk her and then get her out, then you want to release only one.
Mhm.
But most of them, you had to release the whole works and put the cows back in the stalls again.
Were other farmers making such things too? Were they?
Just this agricultural thing, we're always doing something. You know, our own idea put into practice.
And is it the kind of thing where you swap ideas when you get together, or is it?
Well, ideas, yes, but then again, we all do our own work.
Mhm.
Now, here's a picture of a herd.
And how many were in the herd?
At the end, we had about 190. Starting out with one or, well, three, two cows, two heifers, and a bull.
And they were of the same herd that you?
No, not that we start with, because then you get in the same bloodline, so you change the bulls. Now, one bull here, I don't know whether they got a pig, you can set that down. One other than that cow. That cow used to milk 10 gallons of milk at each milking.
It's a hard-working girl.
Yeah. This was a grand champion at the fairs at Sacramento State and the Cow Palace. She was grand champion, never been defeated. Over there.
Did you have pretty much the same barns throughout, or did you remake your
When
barns?
we started, we didn't have, in 1947, we built a legal barn designed by the University of California. Then we put in some of the ideas, you know, the feeding and in the barn there was our own idea. But the University of California is the one that had according to regulations, we had to build it.
Were there, what were some of the regulations? A certain kind of floor? Was there a material you had to use on the floor?
And
What was
the
that?
floor and the washing, you know, the drainage and all that, and the holding corrals before they come to the barn. And those are some of our ideas and some of theirs. Now, I remember when we were building the cooler, we built that ourselves. We got the design from the university and the instructions how to do it. We did that ourselves. And when the finishing, because I was didn't know anything about plastering, but we had they were building the highway, and we got some of the Mexicans on Saturdays and Sundays to do the cement work, the finish work. Come the day, and they were not available. So this here, on this one picture, that was my brother-in-law, no, the one that stanchions.
Oh, on the album?
Yeah. See, that was my brother-in-law. And the Mexicans didn't come, so we had to finish the coal box. So I never threw a slug of mortar in my life. So he showed me how to do it. We were working there 10, 11 o'clock at night to finish it. You should see the finish how it come out, just like those Mexicans. But they couldn't come, so we had to do it because they had a knit with the floor. And they didn't show up, so we were fouled up on that, but we stuck with it until we made it.
Did Mexicans do much of the building in the area when it came
No.
time to put the houses?
No, we contracted all the cement work. Of course, we helped pushing the wheelbarrows, They built, then they didn't have the scoop to go from the mixer to put the cement in the farms. And that, the first day, they did it all with the wheelbarrows, and we had to help. No, I want to tell you, that was a job. Because they built the ramps, to go up and dump the stuff in, but that was too slow. But then a couple of days after that, they got a scoop, and now they pump the stuff in. So we did everything the hard way.
Influence on the farmers in Dixon? You were saying that they had certain regulations about how the barns were being built. Were there other things like that came across?
Well, you take, I imagine the insurance situation has changed, and the labor laws have changed and all that. Because we had there, I can remember when I first got home from school, the workers, in the fields, when it come crop time, they'd strike. So then what they do at Dixon, they take the fire, if they had a meeting in town, they take the fire department and hose them down, which was
What
uncalled
union
for.
was it? Do you remember what union it was?
Well, it was, I don't think, because we never knew too much about farmers being union. But when I went back, and that is one of the first trips I used to go back for the association, they were talking this farmers union back there that was being, Western Farmers Union, was being just in its infant stage back there in 1964 and 65. And then that drifted out west, but it didn't work here at all.
But there were attempted strikes.
Yeah.
In the 1960s or earlier?
Well, I imagine about that time when this started to, when we got water in here, then that changed the farming practices here. And that's about the time these Mexicans come in from Mexico on piecework, they wanted to work on piecework. Heck, if labor was $4 an hour, some of those boys used to pick, an abundance of tomatoes by hand, they made a lot of money.
So most of the people who were involved in the union activities, were they Mexicans or were they from different parts of California?
At first, we used to have Mexicans and different, people. Japanese, Chinese, Hindus. But I understand now the problems over here at San Quentin, when they have, my son's a guard over there. It's generally the Mexicans amongst themselves, the ones from northern Mexico, southern Mexico, or the Mexicans and the blacks.
Where were those Chinese people from? Why were they here in Dixon, do you think?
Well, they lived there because it was a rooming place. Now, in the olden history of Dixon, there were a lot of Chinese, especially in the orchards and like that. Vacaville was noted for that. There used to be a Chinatown. There was none of the Chinese. And then they'd use them out here in the railroads. They'd build them out here in the fields.
So there was a pretty strong presence of Chinese people in this area.
I remember, see the way Well, talk about drugging like that. They used to have these long pipes, you know, sitting out in the sun there in the front porch, and have these pipes and smoking away, you know, or whatever they used.
And did they have businesses eventually?
Well, not so much business. They work out more than their own business. They have markets with Chinese in them, like Sacramento. There were a lot of them. Because there was one, I remember, he used to come down here and buy a lot of veal or pigs from fat pigs from me. He had his own butcher shop in town.
And the type of meat that were used, were you saying that there used to be a fair amount of slaughterhouses here? What was the meat that was produced? Was it lamb mostly?
Lamb was popular. This area here at Dixon was a lot of sheep when we moved here. Sometimes we'd be going to school and they'd herd them. See, they had fences and they'd drive them, they wouldn't truck them. Thousands, 2,000s in a flock. And sometimes there was one coming, one going. Then what they did, they'd use somebody's corrals, you know. We all had corrals to keep the cows. So they'd drive one bunch in that area there and then go on with them and then go on with the others. You could drive through with the car. And these herders would have a stick and a dog generally with them. And they'd walk in there and open up the passage and drive through. But you had to be careful not to run into them.
Well,